She will even go over the plot with you, bless her. So when she gets up to St. Peter's domain, in that special code reserved for writers, we know Vera will be wearing a halo while she types. And then the question is asked, is there a Saints magazine? If not, she will start one. That's our Vera. And we're delighted to have her with us this afternoon, Vera Holding.
Oh, thank you so much.
You see this gets over there.
Well, the people loved Robert Frost who said, poems should begin with delight and end in wisdom. And so it is, I hope this program may be today. Certainly beginning with delight for me, because once I was an Alcoholic Anonymous. And so I was delighted to speak to you all. The reason I say that is because down home at this lovely lady that when she called me the other day, I said, oh yes, I used to belong to Alcoholics Anonymous, AAUW, and she said, I mean this lady who has the transcript flower page, I said, I'm just always being invited to cocktail parties, so I finally just told my hostess that I was an alcoholic, and when I take one drink, I just go overboard. She said, oh honey, I wish you hadn't said that, because you do look like one, your eyes and all. So I thought I'd just confess to begin with that I was, with you girls who are all in sympathy with me. But putting all jokes aside, I don't know why I keep going around and act like a poet, as old and rickety as I'm getting to be. Unless, I've just recently moved to Norman from a little town where I lived 40 years. And two little junior high school girls came to see me one afternoon that were beginning to study Oklahoma history. And one of them said, are you Miss Holding? And I said, yes, I am. And she said, we studied about you today in school. And I said, my heart warmed, And I said, oh, come in, dear, And so they came inside, and one said, yes, it said you were one of the greatest poets of the Southwest. And I thought, maybe I better make these kids some cookies, And but before I could say anything, the other one said, yes, it said that, but you ain't even dead yet. So I thought I better stir around before I die, so that you'll remember I was a poet, maybe. Today I want to bring you my favorite program that I give around everywhere. It's called Your Land and Mine, because I feel that if we ever had need to feel pride in our native land, in our land, we should feel now and defend it with all our hearts and all our minds, because we're in a crisis almost as bad as Vietnam, and we're not over that yet, although we're supposed to be.
Vera,
but anyway,
let's ask these people at the back if they can hear. If they can't, they can move up. Can you hear?
Oh, yeah.
All right, then let us give you a few minutes to move your chairs up. You can even come here in front if you care to.
Thank you.
Yes. Want everybody to hear. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad someone said you couldn't hear, because I want to be heard. Last week I spoke at a country club here in town, and they were remodeling the building. So I had to holler above the saws and hammers, and surely I can holler above a few ladies' voices. Can you all hear me back there? Thank you. Anyway, I want to talk about your land and mine.
It is.
You know how proud we were when our boys were getting off those planes to be Americans, and especially how thankful to God we were that they were coming home. And I feel just that much pride in our own beautiful prairies here in Oklahoma. So I bring you today your land and mine. For these are my prairies, the ones I love. All of my life they have nourished me, body and soul. Their rolling rhythm has stirred music in my heart, like the bygone drums of the old chieftains. The green of their springtime has offered me hope. The rusty beige of their autumn has consoled me and assured me that the autumn time of my own life may be colorful and beautiful if I meet it without sham or pretense, as the unadorned levelness of our prairie holds one with its subtle strength and beauty. These are my prairies, familiar and dear. I feel a kinship. Both of us have held our faces up to the same sun, felt the same wind, whether gentle or sleet-filled. Both of us have felt the tussle of a March sandstorm or the gentle benediction of a prairie rain. Both of us have held against our bosoms red bud and mistletoe. Gaillardia and Red Hall. Both of us have felt the rush of wings and known no other listening air could hold so much of bird song. Both of us have danced under the sky, the star-studded sky, out of the sheer joy of living. For we are of the West, and all the little restless winds pipe dancing tunes to us and for us. Someday the tall buffalo grass will grow over us both, and I shall return to the red dust of my prairies, for I am of them, and they are part of me. Yes, these are my prairies. For I'll bear forever this prairie brand, like a canyon that cuts through a rolling land, deep and jagged, wild and free, but burned into the heart of me. I've seen where the sea bites into the earth, where the mountain cinch its middle girth, where the north wind starts on its frozen way, leaping with gusto out of a bay. I've felt hot winds with the singeing smell of cannons roaring over hell. I've dodged the onslaught out of a maw when a cyclone opened its awful jaw. I've wept over acres of bludgeoned ground, where the deep, lifeless sand could utter no sound. No cry of complaint at the bludgeoning plow that dug at the heart of our land until now. No rusty grass bends in a westerly gale, no quail nests, no roadrunner, naught but death's wail. I've seen the blue twilight, silvered, a quiver. I've heard the land speak, wind, sky, and river. I've heard the night yawning just outside my door, and heard stars sing hymns from a prairie-lit score. Yes, I'll bear forever this prairie brand, like a canyon that cuts through a rolling land, deep and jagged, wild and free, but burned into this heart of me. These prairies have always seemed to me like an old woman, full of moods. In the morning she can be so lithe and lovely and gay, and then by noon a sandstorm can blow up and she's an old hellion. Then that afternoon again the sand will die down, the wind will go away, and she can put a corsage of redbuds against her bosom and start forth to an afternoon tea, the loveliest lady in the land. The prairie has her own delightful moods, capricious as a woman, loved too soon, a lovely, lissome lady at the dawn, a spitfire, blazing passion at the noon, high-strung and notionate, a thoroughbred. She throws a tantrum, veils her face with sand, then penitent, she holds an April smile and holds adoring hearts within her hand. Oh, prairies, unpredictable and free, forever changing, never dull nor bold, oh, hold me with your moods of warmth and cheer, that I may know your strength when I am old. And I always say it won't be long now. About the loveliest mood of the prairie is God's dawn. When God's enthralling dawn moves through the sky, a subtle, lucent mystery clothed in white, creation waits to greet the radiant light, as though the earth turns on its arm to sigh, yet drowsy from rapt dreams, and wonders why it must arise and tuck away the night, and bid the sun get ready for his flight across a world where dreams can never die. And out of this, and then there comes the sun, a great gold god who climbs a waking east, incalculably old, and yet the same as though his race through ether just begun. A fresh new day, unmarred by pride or hate. Each life finds hope within this morning gate. But the loveliest time in the prairie, and the prairies are of contrast, is winter night. I grew up on a ranch halfway between Fort Cobb and Anadarko, and over there the tall cottonwoods along the Washita hold the snow on the ground much longer. So every year I go over there and act like a poet. It was they who sent me to this wonderful McDowell colony. So I'm always beholden to all the McDowell clubs of the Southwest. But one night I went over there to speak, and I came out, act like a poet rather, and as we came out, it was a night meeting, why the most beautiful, soft, big flakes were falling down, snowflakes. And though I had been over that same old road for the past 103 years, we got in the car and started home, a bunch of ladies and I. And we got entirely off the road and lost, although I had been over there so many times. But this is what I saw. winter night. If you've never seen the prairies wrapped in lovely silvery white, with every small star lantern lit to glorify the night, if you've never traveled slowly when the moon hung sensitized from the jeweled vapor rising from a world half hypnotized, if you've never seen the pine trees in reflection all aglow from candlelight through window pane across the drifted snow, if you've never seen such beauty spread above the prairie sod, you've never seen a winter night or been so close to God. Now here's the old hellion, sandstorm. A snort and a shake of a sorrel mane and whistle of fiendish rage, then with raring, plunging, maddening charge, the red sand whips the sage. With bloodshot eyes and lips of foam, no bridle can hold it back, till the pawed and shaken prairie is the hue of an old toe sack, and the new ground, drilled for cotton, is a furrowed field no more, just a dust bowl or a wallow, a sand heap steeped in gore. But to take away that ugly picture, have you seen the green embroidery cottonwoods can feather stitch as they border lakes and rivers? Have you held a water witch? Have you seen the lady prairie paint her lips with old sumac, do a polka to the rhythm of the lacy tamarack? Have you seen the dogwood maidens' slender forms in silhouette? Have you heard the drums at sundown from old chiefs a-dreamin' yet? Have you climbed Mount Scott at sunrise, viewed the mirrored lakes below? Have you gloried in tradition? Did you know Geronimo? Read by gypsies gaily tripping, blanket flowers, Indian fair, treks of beauty, soul's enrichment, foliage show on winding stair, bats in clouds of winged fury from earth's alabaster room, Cowtown, Agency, or Tulsa, sandstorm, cyclone, or oil boom, salt plains, lead mines, coal and copper, vaulted towers, marble wall, Haskell, Marlin, or Bill Murray write the story of it all. Prairie goes and rippling wheat fields feeds a world of hungry men. Herefords dot the rolling hillsides. Grass as green now as back when cattle kings drove herds to market, blazed the famed old Chisholm Trail, hearts as big and clasps as tender as when riders carried mail. From the red land territories, dugouts, cabins, homestead shack, men have made him blaze and glory, half across the world and back. Men of valor, faith, and courage, bred of red men fused with white, who took up the sword for right. From the teepee to the White House, from Red Hills to halls of fame, men like Childers or Blue Eagle, Owen, Rogers, Vestal came. Have you heard the long, low sobbing of a mauve-gray prairie rain? Have you felt the lash of sandstorm? Have you known the sharp, sweet pain of a nightingale complaining near a lonely churchyard mound, when your empty heart re-echoed every lonely, plaintive sound? Then you know the sweetest kinship and the lure of prairie sod, and that field and folk and landscape are in partnership with God. Here on these prairies we have very definite prairie personalities, and the sweetest personality in anybody's book or in anybody's state would be that prairie mother who came here in the long ago in an ox cart or a covered wagon and brought for her few possessions to this new red land. She might have been your grandmother or your great-grandmother, but thank God she was my own prairie mother. This poem is in the 7th grade textbooks of Oklahoma, which makes me very proud, of course. Prairie Mother. She only made a prairie home. She swept a puncheon floor. She planted morning glory vines in a riot near the door. She hung her rifle on the wall in easy reach and prayed that she might never take it down through fear of Indian raid. All night she heard the lonely wind, the mournful coyote's tune, as ghostly, squatting haunches hunkered there against the moon. She saw the silent shadow of a lone wolf in the rocks, down by the spring where she must go to wash and sun her crocs. She put her children's fears to rout by hero tales she knew. She taught them from the holy book as minds and bodies grew. And this, the living harvest yield implanted through her toil, the rich red-blooded men of faith who sprang from prairie soil. She only made a prairie home. She swept a puncheon floor. She mothered God's nobility. How could she give us more? Then as a companion piece to that, I want to read my heritage. I came to this country a long time ago when men were men and women were glad of it. And I think we all like to hearken back to that old cowman somewhere in our lineage. I think of my father and thrill with pride. My father could rope and how he could ride. I loved how he sat in his saddle so straight as I ran to meet him and opened the gate. I think of them now as time takes wing. The one who could ride and the one who could sing. The one gave me courage, the other a song for a wearisome mile or a day that's long. My parents came from South Texas at the time of the first great devastating Galveston flood when so many people were drowned. And all we had left in our worldly possessions was a beautiful, beautiful hand-painted milk hanging lamp. It was over at Grandpa's house or it would have been destroyed. We lived at the confluence of the San Saba and the Colorado rivers. And of course, when the flood came to Galveston, it backed up all the big rivers and we all had floods. And so all the way from that torturous journey from South Texas to Oklahoma in a covered wagon, just going over a cattle trail, Papa rode a horse ahead and Mama batted us 7 children back in the wagon and tried to drive and hold that lamp in her arms. And so it's my greatest possession besides my mother's Bible. It hangs in my little dining nook in my little house over at Norman. And she brought it here to Oklahoma and hung it on a dugout rafter, and it became something so much more than just a light. It became a symbol of joy and happiness and high hopes. And so I call this one Symbol. It won for me the Miriam Whitney White Award for the poem that contributed the most to Americana. The Symbol. My mother had a hanging lamp suspended from a rafter, one note of prairie elegance, faith symbol and bright laughter. When Mother pulled the shining chains which held the magic light, she put a match to well-trimmed wick, and suddenly the night crouched back in dusky corners, and in the central glow an angel stood, hand lifted. With gentle sigh and slow, she moved the lamp bowl upward and watched the winding chain, while crystal prisms twinkled, rainbows after rain. No pride nor hurt could linger there. No trouble of the day could long abide in our small hearts, where rainbows were at play. Sometimes when shadows thick and dark into my life have drifted, in need of faith, I light her lamp and see her there, hand lifted. That gets me broken out. Now, over here in the back of this little book, I have some things called tumbleweeds, just small thoughts that have blown up against the fence of my imagination. And this is the way the book looks before I've traveled around with it. So it doesn't look like this old beat-up thing. As I go around acting like a poison, I pass a few old-timey things which thrills my heart. Amongst them is a barbed wire fence. It isn't barbed wire, it's barbed wire. But I used to be a music teacher. There's this lovely lady here. And anyway, though, when I see these little fat jolly blackbirds sitting on 5 lines and 4 spaces and a full stride here, I always feel that this musical score. So I call this one Pitch. A row of jolly blackbirds on a fence, a fat black notes against the score of spring, so placed that nature's do-re-mi is heard, and joyful hearts have but to stand and sing. And this is a good one to say about this time of the year. Fatherhood. Weary, the worried wind paces the corridors of night, weighing the earth's new birth, the spring. This one I love. So many stars have fallen, seems to me. The skies could not be held in perfect place without these brilliant thumbtacks of the night to stud the canopy in curving space. Yet once some shepherds standing on a hill observed one star much brighter than the others, and following its beam across the night, they found a miracle that makes us brothers. Thank goodness. Then over here I have my creed. I have an old-fashioned wooden bed, and it's 2 years older than I am, so you know how old it is. And I have this little thing. I write a note to myself and pin it on the bottom of the bed there. So, and it's I, myself, and me. I'll fold up my troubles and lay them away on the highest out-of-reach shelf. For troubles are doubled if carried about, and no one can help but myself. So get up there and get high behind you. Have a job to do today. Then my creed: a little love, a little sleep, a place to write, a time to weep, a little play, a little song. This is my creed. I can't go wrong. Then I had the happy privilege of, being on the staff of the Colorado University 2 summers, and that was when we first were beginning to wear pants, so they were kind, And so they had short shorts and clam diggers and tight pants and knit pants and flared leg pants, and I've never seen so many kind of pants. While Granny was swishing around in a long dress and high heels, And so I decided, well, if I was going to be a swinger, I better get out and do something about it. So I went to a sale, of pants. I didn't have no pants. And so I went down there to sale, $1.98 for these beautiful slacks, and I was in a three-way mirror. And I looked at myself in the back and decided to get it. So I came home and I wrote this. Must I walk in flats, I who once so prided the curve of a silken-clad shank above sharp toes and heels? Should I parade in pants, I who once loved whispers of bouffant skirts swishing slightly? Shall I play this game of make-believe or be the woman I have grown up with who lives inside of poor old me? So I decided to get it. Now, some of you may not know this, but I used to write true stories, which is very bad. Don't tell anyone, and because your name isn't signed to them. But here's my latest true story. Every mail brings catalogs of flowers, bulbs, and trees, a springtime revolution with folks on buying sprees. For there's something in a garden when summer's on the make that turns us into hussies out dealing with a rake. Then here's my latest confession. My head is not too wise, I know. So I obey my heart. It gets me in some awful jams. It makes me play the part of fool in many little shows, all staged along with living. I couldn't stand to live with it if I were not forgiving. And then over here, before I leave that page, though, I wanted to read you this one. This is my dearest poem to my heart beside the prairie mother. I lost my sweetheart of 50 years several years ago, and everybody in a little town is like your own family. And so everybody thought of so many things to do for me that I tried to think, they think of me as a poet, and I tried to think of little notes that send to my many friends. So this is what I wrote: love remains. So many happy things have come to me throughout the years. The work I love, and quiet rest, and more of joy than tears. Gay courage, music, well-thumbed books, my children's happy laughter. True love that lives, endures, and binds us now, and even after this restless day, this hurried hour has passed, for life must end. There will remain life's greatest boon, sweet recompense, a friend. And then over here, unless I've lost it, which I have, oh, here it is. I wrote this one May for a sweet old gentleman who just passed last week when redbuds, 2 weeks ago, when redbuds were blooming, and every day I'd take him a redbud. And he'd soon be 91, and we have a story coming together in the June Horseman, what is that, the Western Horseman. which is a nice, slick magazine. And he brought me scrapbooks of wonderful stories to write about all the time, because he was a student of mine over at OU and the most blessed old man in the world. So he told me one time during the last week, I sat up with him every night, and he said, Vera, it just takes so long to die, doesn't it? Or he had to say it very slowly. He was so weak. So when he finally passed, and I said, of course it does, but I just think of what a beautiful time you're going, in the time of roses, in the redbud time. And he says, I know it. And he said, when I get up there, I'm going to corner old Paul and say, what in the name of heaven did you write that book of Romans? Nobody can understand it. So he was cute even in death. So I wrote this one. 1/2 May. And I hope somebody reads this at my funeral. Josephine, you can read this at my funeral. Or maybe Ethel, she reads this at her friend's funerals. When I shall go down that shining road at the end of a happy day, oh, let it be in redbud time, 1/2 the month of May. Let there be dogwood, white in the sun, combing her petaled hair, with a May breath wind of the gentle spring to offer a little prayer. Oh, let my prairies curve and flow from the red hills south to the sea, that I may feel their warmth and strength, and that they accompany me. May there be fields of new-turned earth, red in the sun's last ray. These I shall take. These are the vistas I want to take down the shining road in May. Oh, let the listening air be filled with voices I've loved and remembered. This I shall take when my heart is still and my cheeks are cold as December. Prairie born, I shall return to the loam, free as the wind and the weather. There is no death, just a turning home, while prairie stars sing together. So remember that, you all, or I'll haunt you. Then over here in this back of this poor corrupted book, I have some things that I call mavericks. And you of the cow country know what a maverick is. It's just something that a cowman puts or any kind of rancher puts his brand on. And of course, nobody in Oklahoma ever did this, but many cattle kings of Texas got rich just putting a brand on a stray animal. So these have my brand on them because I sold them to some cow magazine. But they bear no resemblance to poetry, and I hope you Alcoholics Anonymous know that I can write better poetry. But I was given this marvelous trip to the Peterborough, the McDowell colony at Peterborough, New Hampshire. And so that was right after old Steinbeck had so maligned our beautiful prairies. And I was just going to go up there and really write something that, you know, just to pin his ears back forever. And so it's in the evening, we sat around in this beautiful old converted barn for our eating meal. It wasn't converted like baptism and, you know, the Holy Ghost. It was just made over. And but anyway, it was just beautiful. And we went in the daytime. We went on to our little nooks out in the woods, little cabins, and did our writing. And so, but that was right at the time when Mr. Turner, our former governor, was having such a terrible time with that male animal. You know, it was in all the headlines, even the New York papers and the Cleveland County so-and-so's papers and everybody. And I would get and I was so careful. I practiced all the way up there and back how I was going to not say you all, not going to say shnuff or anything, you know, because they'd say that's an okie. I was so sick of that word. And so, but I got up there, you know, and so they'd gather around in the evening at different tables, and the musicians would sit over here, and the sculptors over there, and the novelists here, and the poets there. And only 20 people out of the whole world could go at one time, and I was, you know, chopping in awful high cotton. I knew that. So I went over there to this. I thought, well, I'm going to sit with a novelist so I can learn a little about time and pace and setting and dialogue, because I never had heard of Foster Harris at that time. So I sat over there at that table, and they found it right away that I was from Oklahoma. Not that I wasn't proud of being from Oklahoma, but I don't know what I said just made them think that. But they said, oh, tell us about your governor, and that said it right out in plain words like that. And that's all we talked about was that girl. And then they talked about how this little bottle she had passed around without having any pop of air, you know. And so I was just my back hair curled up because I was a cattleman's daughter. We didn't have that for subject for our evening meal at home. So I went back over there with my pure poets. And that night I wrote the McDowell Club soliloquy. Ain't nothing like it used to be. Dad darn, I feel forsook. They're plowing up our grassland and planting by the book. The Brandons getting acidized and rustling's in a truck. They're eating store-bought biscuits instead of old-time chuck. Sheep and cattle grazing right on the same dang range with drugstore cowboys clowning in play clothes looking strange. There ain't no calves here anymore. They all are baby bees. It's all a high-ho silver and a heap of make-believes. With scientists are figuring out how pappies have no pull, I'm worried plumb to death about the status of that bull. So the next morning I got a telegram that says, come home quick, you ain't learning nothing. So I came home quickly. So the next, then I worked for my sweet dear husband, you know. Did anybody ever work for their husbands? You know, you get credit on your room and board. And so I got credit on my room and board, but finally I persuaded him to let me take Friday to mail out poetry because I was about to die to see my name in somebody else's paper besides the Tipton Tribune. I could put that in every other line because we owned the paper and I was the editor. But I wanted to see it in some big paper, you know. So, I'd send off poetry, and I'd get it back. Dear Miss Holding, this is so lovely, but I read penciled it a few times, you know. I'd look at it, and for $5 we would correct this poem and get it in perfect order so it couldn't be so-and-so. But I was the bookkeeper as well as the sweeper outer. So I'd take $5 out of the cash register and mail it off hurriedly, you know, couldn't wait to see that in some cow magazine. And so then it got to be $10. Dear Miss Holding, your poem is so beautiful, it needs a little editing though, and so I've taken the opportunity of correcting it a little bit, and then maybe you can send it to the Atlantic Monthly. You know, if, for instance, that one about the bull, to the Atlantic Monthly. So, of course, I took out $10, but it finally got up to be $25. And this was before we had TVs, but this was going to be on this radio station out there in New Mexico where they opened every morning at 3 o'clock singing, I'm red, you know. So, oh boy, I forgot that Chet looked at the checks, you know, when he came home. I was afraid to send him cash, so I sent him $25. So that poem came back and just had two things in it that I wrote, thee and And so and my husband fired me that same day because the check came back, you know, canceled. So I went home just stomping, and we had some pre-war stuff there. We had the most elegant black girl that lived out there, and her name was Easter Lily. And she was the best critic that I ever had. So this is advice she gave me. Don't you pay no attention to that white trash criticizing, the way you speak your English, the way you agonizing with them little verses dropping out like David in the book. Go on, white child, don't pay no mind by word or sign or look. How come he know what's in your head? How he know how to say it? It's just like criticizing eggs. He don't know how to lay it. Quit taking everybody's word. Just stick to your own knitting. And some of these days you're going to write some stuff that sure is fitting. And someday when you're sitting in your feather bed in riches, you just remember what I told you. Men is all just breath and breeches. I thought somebody would say amen to that one, Shirley. As I told you, we had the paper there for 40 years. I begun when I was just a small child working for my husband. But anyway, we had this little column in the paper during the war years called Under Stars and Stripes. And the mothers would bring me in the letters from their sons, and they all felt like, you know, I always felt like they were some kin to me. And we kept up with them. Sometimes we put their serial number in, and sometimes they'd even meet each other over there. So it was a marvelous, happy thing for me to do. But of course, I could not possibly put all those letters in, so I'd just take the little excerpts out of each one and put in a little each week. But if I'd roll them all up into one letter, it would go something like this. Dear Mom, I dream about our little house, the feel of it, the smell, the way the kitchen windows shine, the gallery and the L. I see the pan of dough set back to rise to double size, the checkered cloth spread over it to hide the big surprise of buns all brown with cinnamon and yellow butter dots. And just behind the stovepipe, those shining pans and pots. Don't move that old corn popper, just leave it hanging there. And does old sport still take his naps in that old sagging chair? Don't put linoleum on the floor, just leave it dark and bare, with those hooked rugs like little stars a blooming here and there. It's queer, the sights, the sounds, the smells you hanker for. It's true that foxholes aren't so bad if you can dream the way I do. Dear Mom, don't think I'm shell-shocked or cracked up in my dome. It's only that I want the same old things unchanged. That's home. But some of our boys never made it home, nor will they ever make it home again. And every day we see pictures on TV and read in the paper about more flag draped caskets coming home. And so for my neighbor's boy and my sister's boy, or my sister, and for every mother in the world who lost a little son, I wrote my neighbor's boy. I held his hand, and tears unbidden fell across my eyes. For what is there to say when one son dies? Ah, he was valiant, young, and oh so fair, my neighbor's boy who gave his life out there. I felt his hand and felt the tremble of his thin old frame. Emotion stirred my heart, and so I came to sit a while, to hold his hand and weep. The sorrow road we climb is oh so steep. And for my neighbor, who might be half across the world, and my sister, I wrote Petition. Petition is a prayer poem that was developed and made into, as a project of the American War Mothers, into plaques. And I have one here today that I want any of you who have a grieving mother to have and send to her. But anyway, we sent out literally thousands of these called Petition.
Well,
Mother
yes,
of
no,
Jesus,
Louise.
Holy One, you know
yes.
my heart, for you bore a son. You watched the laughter curve his mouth, felt his light breath like wind from the south. Mother of Jesus, Holy One, show me the way. You too lost your son. He was so tender. Your son was too. Lovely Madonna, may I like you, go bravely onward, bowed by the rod. Teach me to know that he is with God. Mother of sorrow, help me to know. Every tomorrow somehow must go. You saw your dear one hanging to a tree. I must not let this crucify me. Dear gentle lady, Mother divine, while you're with your son, watch over mine. For poets must live in time of war and chaos, when it seems that the beauty of the entire universe is covered over with the rust of our own past destructiveness. Whether a poet be conscious of the careful turning and polishing of words and phrases, or whether it be the more natural, casual utterances, poets are filled at all times with a holy wondering. But whether I can go on and write something really worthwhile and wonderful, all that I hope to do is to stir some heart to do better, or bring comfort to somebody, or to lift. A real lyric should have voice and soul and song. And so that's the kind of poetry that I try to write. I think that it's up to the poets and the writers of America and the club women of America to do their very best to keep the vine tended at the doorway and the hearth swept and shining, that beauty and love and goodness may again dwell in this tired old earth. For beauty is love, and love is of God, a God who can temper the winds and the weather. Hold fast to your faith. Let the prayer of your heart be a paean for peace, till the stars sing together. For peace is more than the signing of an armistice. Peace is more than the cessation of cannons. Peace is loving instead of hating. Peace is tolerance, regardless of race or color or creed. Peace is faith, faith in yourself, in your fellow man, and faith in your God. Peace is a tall, shining Christmas tree and happy children's laughter. Peace is a little white church on the prairie, where the people come together to worship the risen Christ. Peace is a wonderful group of retired teachers and AAUW ladies who have come together because they've had such a wonderful influence in the life of our youth, and their influence goes on and on. All this is peace, and the finest form of a democracy. It's your land and mine. For beyond the limitless prairie that cradles the western stars, a land so wide, so rolling free, where hearts let loose the bars, to drop in seeds that come to flower, to pour out faith, a moving power. It's your land and mine. A land so full of moving earth, where blanket flowers fill, a bronze gold glory lavishly on every long red hill. The subtleness of level land beneath the sky, the wind and sand. It's your land and mine. A throat full of remembered spring cannot be borne for long. All pain, bold beauty, a thing to hold like a song. It's your land and mine. Let's love it enough to pray for it. Thank you very much.
B. Roberts on an interview with Mr. Waldron. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is interviewer Mary B. Roberts this morning with a most interesting interview with Mr. Harry Green. Oh, no. Let's see, that was his Swedish name. We know him better as Mr. Harry Waldgren, W-A-H-L-G-R-E-N, Waldgren. You'll be interested in him because he dates back 33 years in our Weather Bureau from WKY. The next voice you hear will be his. You came here as an assistant to whom?
John Pemberton Slaughter was the man in charge. The papers dubbed him Jupiter Pluvius. And he was a hard-boiled sergeant and one of the vanishing Virginian type. He'd cuss you out fluently, and he was the finest man you ever knew. Had a heart of gold, but very active in the Masons. Even the employees of the plumbing companies and others that had to go out and work on the Weather Bureau 1923 class refused to work there. And they complained to the boss, and the boss had to tell him why they wouldn't come. He said because he cussed them out. He said, I never used a cuss word. He didn't realize it. He just used it like we'd use the ordinary language. He's a great guy and one of the finest instructors I ever had. In fact, the Weather Bureau was in the Signal Corps, but first, let me say that my folks were Swedish, born in Falköping, Sweden, a little town near Gothenburg, and both were born in the same house. My father's bought the house from my mother's father. My mother was about 20 days older, and between them they moved out, and both were born in the same house. Dad never let mother forget that she was the older, although only 20 days. Dad and she had a romance. Her dad was a coppersmith for the king, and his dad run a hotel, and I suppose a tavern, and his sister didn't think my mother was quite good enough for them, so they made life rather miserable for Dad. He propositioned him when he's 19, if they give him enough money to come to America, he would come. Well, they gave him the money, thinking that'd break the romance. But he came over, and a year later she followed. However, they weren't married for about 6 or 7 years. They went together constantly. And my mother came over at 19. She worked in a butcher shop, and what she didn't know about meat wasn't worth knowing. They came over here. She got a job with the owner of a paper in Kilcook, Iowa, because Dad went to Kilcook. I had a cousin there, his father did, and I hadn't heard from him years, but that's where he lit out. When he got to Kilcook Railroad Station, he found this so-called cousin lived 10 miles out in the country. He couldn't talk the language. No taxis, of course. Nothing but horse and wagon and what we called hacks to carry you around, buggies. And he started walking. It's 4th of July. He had an overcoat on, heavy clothes, and a valise. Well, anyhow, on the way out this 10 miles, he met a fellow bedecked with all kinds of ribbons, epaulets on his shoulders, and they walked out. This fellow talked English, and Dad couldn't answer him, of course, except in Swedish. He walked out about 4 miles. This man went into a great big brick building, and Dad said, they said goodbye, waved to each other. Dad wrote home that he evidently was hobnobbing with royalty, but as was, this man was crazy, and this was a mental institution that he was going in. He got out in the country, and then found there was no work on the farm, so he came to town to work in the stockyard, or not in the stockyard, the meat packing business, and he got in with an Irish Catholic family. They said no one could spell Waldron, W-A-H-L-G-R-E-N, so he took, and they suggested the name of Green. He took that name, Green, and I was baptized, my sisters and brothers, under the name of Green.
Now this was still in
This was Kilcock, Iowa. And then he made it. My father went to Sweden for 3 months with a couple of friends. He was going to take me to Sweden, but school had a month to run, and school to this young father in Sweden was more important than travel. He'd take me next time. But when he got on the boat at New York City and said goodbye to Statue of Liberty, tears came to his eyes and he wanted to jump off the boat. In fact, they had a going away party for him. They had a phonograph with a horn about 4 feet long. That's the way they got volume on phonographs in the old days. And they played a song I'll never forget. Oh, Mr. Captain, stop the ship. I want to get off and walk. And he did. He went to Sweden, came back, papers interviewed him, said, how do you like Sweden? Said the United States is the land of plenty and the place I want. He said I wouldn't live in Sweden if they gave me the King's Palace and $1 million a year. And $1 million a year used to be some money in those days, although it isn't now. In fact, I read the other day that said keep your money; it may be valuable someday, and that came to true. Well, anyhow, his folks thought it was a shame the name had dropped out because he lost 5 or 6 brothers in a typhoid epidemic, and his only living brother was in Hamburg, Germany. He also changed his name, so the name would have died out, although my father had 2 sisters in this country then. And so he went to court, took the necessary papers so that they know he wasn't beating his death, and took the name Waldron back. And people would say Green to us, and apologize. I bet we heard 1,000 apologies on account of not calling us. But we're so glad that they did, because now in the city of Oklahoma City, there's only 2 Waldrons, my brother and I. And it makes it real nice on mail. You don't get it mixed up. Well, anyhow, my parents...
Your mother, did we get her maiden name?
Her name was Josephine Matson.
Josephine Matson, M-A-D...
M-A-T...
Matson, M-A-T-S-O-N, T as in Tom. All right, thank you. And you told us how we got the Waldron car.
And then she had 2 brothers. One of them run a little schooner, and he took his younger brother with him to sea, and he disappeared. They never came back. And my mother told me that her mother kept a light in the window till she died, and she died about 60 years later. Those brothers were never heard of. And father had 2 sisters in this country. Waldron is spelled W-A-H-L-G-R-N. And folks spell it in every way.
I looked for you under W-A-L-D-R-E-N.
And some are
And
W-A-L.
then someone at the Weather Bureau said, no, you're looking in the wrong place. It's W-A-H-L.
Yeah.
So that's how I found you.
Yeah, it's common that way. Well, I must get on because I'll talk all day. I came to Oklahoma City in 1911 and became a man. I was 21 in those days. I guess 18 now. In Oklahoma City. I'd been here. I came here the 1st September. I was in Keokuk, Iowa, went as a messenger boy at $30 a month, about a 60-hour week. No Saturday afternoons off, and sick leave was 15 days. If you got sick longer than that, your pay stopped. Good old days, they can have them. Well, anyhow, the boss was quite a fisherman. He's the man in charge of the Ghost Wish. He was an Army sergeant because the Weather Bureau started in the Signal Corps of the Weather Bureau. And they were these hard-boiled sergeants. Well, anyhow, I took the examination for assistant observer. They sent me to Miami, Florida. And when the appointment come, he said, Harry, you don't want to go to Miami. There's nothing there but Negroes and mosquitoes. And I said, well, you don't think it's a good place? He said, no, the swamps hadn't been cleared, don't you see? And it's very swampy and undesirable. Well, I wrote my resignation. And he was quite a philosopher. He taught me a lot of philosophy. He said, Harry, never do a thing like that. So sleep over every decision you're making that's worthwhile. I slept over it. He said, I'm going fishing. He's a wonderful fisherman. He'd catch where others couldn't, but he never ate a fish or a piece of fish in his life. And he'd give it to a friend. While he went fishing, hurt his back, was laid up for weeks. Washington kept wiring a telegraph. He'd say, when are you going to Oklahoma? And I'd say, well, Mr. Grosswish will still be in the hospital for 3-4 weeks or this or that. They got tired of waiting and wired me. Said, will you go to Oklahoma City, assistant observer, $60 a month, pay your own way to Oklahoma City. They wouldn't even pay my way. I said, yeah. I came down here and Mr. Slaughter and their group was so glad to have me. I couldn't understand why. He and Mr. Slaughter, the hard-boiled Army sergeant, said, Mr. Walton, so glad to see you. Well, I said, I'm glad to be here. He said, you're a printer, aren't you? I said, no. He said, well, you've done some printing. I said, no. He said, what do you know about printing? I said, I saw a printing press once. He ripped out a note. And he said, well, I'll be blankety blank blank. He said, what are you going to do about it? I said, listen, Oklahoma City isn't the only town in the country. There's other towns I can go to in the Weather Bureau. He walked off kind of disgustedly. Later told a friend of mine, the telegraph operator for Western Union, that came out, said that young fellow do. He just said he didn't want it. I said, if I stay here, I'll learn printing. And I did. I took charge of printing office. We had all kinds of printing, not only for Oklahoma, but for New Mexico.
Well, why was the printing so important?
Because they needed a printer. They had to print their bulletins. See, there's no radio.
Right. It wasn't radio.
No radio, no TV.
Tell us how they
made a weather map here with a chalk plate and poured lead over it, made the weather map with the isobars, those lines of equal pressure, and isotherms, the lines of equal temperature.
I've heard of those.
And we took them around the town, the various stores downtown, the high school and other schools, and also
were they posted where people could
see them? But there was no way. We did have a system of calling people when there was going to be cold waves, but you had to call them on telephone. For instance, gas and electric. Gas company and electric were combined. We'd call them, they'd take the big, when it's cold wave, take Acme Brick and those big consumers off, so you ordinary people would have gas. And it was very crude out, and we'd get reports twice a day. 6:30 in the morning, 6:30 at night through St. Louis. Probably 40 or 50 stations scattered over the country and in Canada. And then we wouldn't know a thing about weather. Now today they have reports on the teletype every minute, so they can tell you what the weather is in New York City at the present time, or in Los Angeles, or Mexico, or Stockholm. But in those days, we were in the dark. If the barometer acted up, we took special readings sent to Washington, and they issued reports of probably destructive storms. It had said there'd be cyclones, as they called them in those days. But people got hysterical and it caused much trouble. They decided not to mention that word and just called them severe thunderstorms. And it was far cry from the present, where you had, and then there's no upper air observations that they have on the meteographs that they send aloft. By the way, that instrument that goes aloft to get weather and temperature and humidity, that's a Russian invention. Yeah, we have to say thanks to them. And another thing, none of them are American discoveries. I was just reading the other night the early Weather Bureau records, and I better hurry on.
Let's get something here about your wife. Did you bring her down here with you?
No, I met her after I came here. I played tennis with her brothers on their tennis court on Miller's Farm, way out in the country, 10th and Villa. And their farm ran from
way out in the country.
Villa to May, yes. That's where they had the school picnic. She graduated from first class at Central, but never went a day at Central. She went over East Side, you know, the education building, and graduated the exercise where at Central. And the sand in there came from her father's sand pit. And Pearl Mest and her sister, Mom had pictures of them with their pigtail hair, you know, out at Emerson school picnic. And that's, as I say, 10th Villa was way out in the country. They, even in 1915, after we were married, we moved out there and built a house. We couldn't get any milk service. There were practically no house between Linwood and Pennsylvania Avenue. So I had to buy a cow. She was an old farm girl, taught me how. And she never milked a cow again. Yeah, and she never milked after that. She used to milk 14 or 15 cows a day at Father Hannah Dairy here in Oklahoma City. That was a farm, 10th Villa. And she was secretary for the executive insurance company. Very brilliant woman in every way, and all music. Yeah, she was very fine singer, had a very fine voice, and direct fires and the like, but she still wouldn't do much solo work, and our youngest daughter was director of music at Kokomo, Indiana, First Methodist Church, downtown church in Kokomo, and has her master's from Oberlin. And she and our older daughter, who is a wife of Professor
What year did she graduate at Oberlin?
She graduated in the 25th anniversary the other day, last week. So what does that make it? Well, we won't go into that. Well, anyhow, she and her sister both made the honorary fraternity that most musicians give their right arm to get in this honorary. And she went to Columbia Artists in New York for an audition and could have gone on their program. But her accomplished Michigan University persuaded her with 4 boys and the uphill climb it would take, it'd be foolish, so she ignored it. But she had a beautiful voice. She sang here in various churches, and soloist in St. Louis for one of the churches.
What
Soloist
church are you a member of?
were Methodist, very active. I was trustee of OCU. We were very active in Pennsylvania Avenue, and my wife's folks did.
Well, I taught at OCU. Were you my boss one time?
I imagine I was till 43, till I got in bed with Mr. Williamson President when he wanted to make a district superintendent that I knew was morally not what he should be. I fought his giving him an honorary degree, doctorate degree in divinity, and John Abernathy, many of you know, was on that board. He picked me up at Weatherby in 19th class. He took me out there, and when I came home, he said, after I fought against this, and they didn't give any degrees that year, he said, Harry, thanks. I said, thank you for bringing, what are you thanking me for? He said, you said the thing I wanted to say and didn't dare to stop me. A few weeks later, this preacher ran off with the assistant preacher of Linwood Methodist Church, abandoned his family. So I was glad I fought. Yes, I was there at the OCU, though, and that day he was in debt. In fact, they had a hard time keeping the mid-continent license over.
Well, I didn't begin there until 51.
Yeah, well,
I taught from 51 until about 56.
Yeah, I knew myself, and we starved those poor teachers. They didn't get enough to live on.
$80 a
I've
month.
always hoped that somebody would pay their back wages. They'd have a lot coming with interest.
When OCU took the government contract for foreign students to come over for the CIA, I volunteered for that because the government paid us by the hour, and it was so much better than the OCU pay. So I had quite an interesting career then, working in counseling and so on with foreign students. Enjoyed it so much.
Mr. Green did such a beautiful job talking college. Our son-in-law is professor of law at Yale University, and his daughter, his oldest daughter and oldest son are in Yale. The son is graduating, going to Berkeley. He's written a book, a student's cartoonist view of great figures in American history. It was put out. He likes to draw, never took a lesson.
When was that put out, Mr. Walden?
Just this year.
Oh,
No, last year, just before Christmas. And he wrote a book for history. He wrote these stories on these fellows. And then he drew pictures. And a friend of his said, I'd like to take him to a friend of mine, Simon & Schuster, the big publisher. He said, oh, that's foolish. He said, no, it isn't. I'll take it in. He took it to Simon & Schuster. He had 40 of them, sent 40 along. Said, if you'll increase this to 100, and he could because he'd already written them, said, we'll take it. They took it and paid him $1,200 in advance. And it's on the book stands, $1.25.
And he was unknown at the time as a writer.
He was unknown. He went to New York, and there's an interesting story, to a big publishing bookstore there. And he buys everything, the old books, especially history. And he bought a book, and he said, will you take my check? He said, have you got your driver's license? I said, I don't have it. He said, he looked around, and here's a book stack of his books. And he's got his picture and a cartoon picture of him. He showed it to the clerk, and he said, will this be identification? He looked at him with amazement. He said, well, that is you. He said, yeah. He said, oh, yeah, I'll take it. Will you autograph some of these books? He did it. Well, anyhow, he's graduating, going to Berkeley, where he won't have a scholarship, while Princeton offered $3,500 scholarship, North Carolina $2,700, Brandeis $35, plus an assistant teaching job, and a dorm, said there'd be no expense. But he goes to California where you're going to have to pay, the folks are going to have to pay full amount.
Well, my daughter is assistant head of the oral history department in the library at Berkeley.
Oh, is that
Yes.
right? Where that's
So
together?
tell him, yes, tell
Yeah.
him to go up to the oral history office
Yeah.
and ask for Amelia Fry
Yeah, I'll do that.
and take
You-
his book along with him.
Yeah.
And then we'll tell him
Yeah.
that her mother.
Yeah, well, I'll see that you have the book because I think you'll enjoy it. He
I'm
takes
sure I
the win in with his Watergate case now, showing how corrupt things can be. He tells of those corrupt things, and some folks will say, well, you shouldn't tell them. But he says it's the truth. Why shouldn't the public know? But we don't want to. We want to glorify
Yeah.
Grant and these other guys that was old man Grant was quite a drunkard, you know.
Well,
And he lived in St. Louis, and I think his cabin's still there.
we're going to have to do some cleanup work. I think in some of
I
our.
think so. I hope we
Mhm.
can. It's
I do
pitiful.
too. Before
Uh,
it's too late.
I came to Oklahoma in 1911, as I told you, on
Let's turn
September
this
September 1st. I have a brother. I have one brother, Frank Walgren. He was district manager of the OG&E in Ardmore till he retired, and now lives out here in the village. And that accident and my coming to Oklahoma affected the lives of a dozen people. He came down here.